To give some background, my family owns a trailer home which sits on a cliff overlooking Lake Katune in the south of the Canadian province of British Columbia. This trailer was used as a sort of summer getaway destination, as my parents and I visit for about a week or more each summer. The trailer itself is quite old. It was turned into a home by the previous owners in the 70s. But despite its age, it's still a very enjoyable place to experience the warmest months. The trailer sits in the middle of a cedar pine forest with a small clearing on the side facing away from the water to park vehicles, as well as a driveway connecting to the road, which is about 110 feet away. The nearest town is roughly a 15-minute drive, and there are no neighbors. I sleep at the opposite end of the trailer, which I call the cabin, as there is an additional dining room and porch built onto the trailer. With their bed at the front end and mine at the very back end, there are 2 windows next to where I sleep, with one facing parallel to the lake, and the other towards the previously mentioned parking area. Due to the positioning of our cabin in the mountain valley, around 9 p.m. in the summer, it gets very, very dark very quickly. Since we sometimes are outside after this time, there's a bright lamp mounted on the front end of the trailer which completely illuminates the porch area facing the lake and partially lights the parking area, creating an orange glow that can get spooky, especially when raining. I hope the backstory wasn't too long, but it might help you get a sense of the surroundings. Around 11 p.m. one night, I was still awake, sitting in bed and reading. I keep the blinds of the window facing away from the lake open as to provide a little light for reading without having to turn on any inside lamps. The light momentarily gets dimmer, so I glance outside. What I saw was a large, almost glowing white creature, which moving through the semi-lit area, casting a shadow over my window. It had very long and spindly limbs, and I could see some contours that looked like emaciated ribs on its side. It was hard to estimate a height because it was moving bent over, and what I can only describe as a crawl. Just looking at it instilled so much fear that I couldn't look away, despite how much I wanted to. The creature moved at a fast walking pace from the front of the cabin and into the tree line. At the same time, I wanted to believe that there was some form of very, very sick, hairless bear, as we frequently saw bears in the area. Looking back, the limbs were just too long to be a bear, and far too skinny. Also, I would think a bear with mange would still have some hair or even discolored skin, but this creature did not. It appeared entirely to be a white color, and the light from the lamp reflected off its side, making it glow a little. I wish I could provide any form of evidence that what I saw really happened, but ultimately, it's you, the reader's choice whether to believe me or not. When I have a moment, I'll draw a diagram to detail its movement in relation from where I was looking. Thanks for listening. This event took place over a year ago, but I hadn't really thought to post about it until now. I don't want to dox myself, but I live in Maryland, and I was with my now ex-girlfriend at her house. It was a rural area, surrounded by woods in all directions. It was night, and we were going to visit her grandparents' house, a short drive away. We got into her car, and while she was fiddling with her phone and the aux cord, I saw something in the brush, illuminated by the headlights. It was tall, pale gray, thin, with a gaunt face and stretched limbs. I don't think it stood the standard 8 feet of a crawler, but my lack of depth perception makes it hard to accurately perceive distance and height. All it did was watch, its seemingly hollow eyes fixated on me. It was gone before I could point it out to my girlfriend, and I didn't have the bravery or stupidity to investigate. I wish I had concrete evidence of what I saw, but all I have is my word and a terrifying memory. Could someone maybe explain what happened to me and my friend and what we saw 2 years ago? So me and my friend TJ, back in 2018, used to do a lot of cryptid and ghost hunting, especially because we're from RI. There's a lot of stories of areas with crazy history. An example is the woods, a block from my house that has some stone steps in the middle of it, completely out of the way from everything. Basically, long story short, the stairs were from a church that burnt down long ago, and rumor has it, people died in that fire, and that's why the woods are haunted now. Me and my friend B saw something in the woods too, which is a different story, but with this image in your head, now you can understand why this has a lot of paranormal activity. Now, back to the main part of the story. Me and TJ one night found out the Conjuring house is like a 20-minute drive from us, so we decided to check it out. It was about 2 a.m. when we started driving there, and a lot of weird stuff started to happen when we got to the first road to the way to the house. For reference to how creepy this area was, it was practically out in the middle of the sticks. Barely any streetlights, and lastly, the energy was the strangest. It felt like we were being watched all the way to the house. When the GPS said about 3 minutes away from the house, TJ's radio started glitching, repeating the chorus of R.I.P. by Joji. Needless to say that the vibe got a lot darker after that, and we actually arrived. When we got there, not much happened until we were about to leave. The vibe was growing worse the longer we stayed, and then TJ heard something, so we left because the energy was something different. As we're leaving, the GPS quickly made us turn to a road different from the way we came. As soon as we were approaching the original entrance to the street of the Conjuring house. At the time, we didn't think much of it because we were just trying to leave the area because the way it was just making us feel. This road was a lot creepier than the others because of how it brought us directly in the middle of the woods. Even some parts weren't paved, if remembering correctly, with really weird looking houses spaced apart. Well, as we were going down the road, I looked down my phone, and in that second, TJ starts punching my arm, yelling, "Look up, look up." And as I looked up, the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life jumps across the road, like 5 feet away from the car, and into the woods at the speed of a cheetah. To give you guys a better idea of what it looked like, first it was as tall as a kangaroo, and I mean the tall ones. The thing had to be at least 7 feet. Second, it was jumping in medium-sized jumps. Not sure what the word for movement is, but quick. How a gear works. That's how smooth and fast the thing's legs touched the ground, propelled forward and repeated. Like in the 4 seconds it took to drive the car to where it was on the road. It was like 100 feet away into the woods. Lastly, the most amazing but strange thing about it was its actual appearance. It looked like moving energy. A bunch of lines moving together in the shape of this animal-looking thing, and its colors were crazy. It was a combination of neon brown, dark green, orange, and some other less noticeable colors that sort of filled in the rest of its shape it was taking. As we drove by, we freaked out over the course and talked about it the whole ride home, just trying to make sense of what we saw. We even tried to find the road we were on that night on 3 separate occasions after that to see if we could maybe see it again, but we never found that road again. That night changed my life because I've never thought I'd see something like that so close, but since then, I've been trying to find answers. Six months ago, I decided to take a late evening hike on the Monte Sano Mountain in Huntsville, Alabama. It was a typical hike, about 3 miles on a looping trail that I am very familiar with. About halfway through, I had the most sudden jolt of absolute terror and doom, like someone close to me had died, and or that I was fixing to die, followed by immediate, the most tired I have ever been, pure exhaustion. It was getting dark, and I did everything in my power to stop moving, but the exhaustion was just too much that I dipped off the trail and a bit found out my bag down against a tree, leaned against it, and dozed off. It was one of those I can hear everything around me kind of sleeps, where you aren't really sure if you're asleep or not asleep. I began to hear what sounded like people walking quickly towards me, breaking branches and rustling leaves. I open my eyes, and the sound immediately stops, and I'm overwhelmed by the feeling that whatever was walking was now not moving because it was watching me. I stay frozen, aside from removing my EDC. For the next 10 minutes, I sit dead still, looking towards the direction the sound was initially coming from. As it continues getting darker, I make the decision to stand and move towards the trail so I don't get lost in that exact moment, and I stand up. Here, the movement again, except this time, it seems to be going the opposite direction, and much quicker I run towards the sound to try and just get a glimpse from the top of a ravine. I then see what appears to be a massive white dog running on all fours, about 75 yards away from me. I whistle the loudest I can, and it immediately freezes, stands up on its back 2 legs, and begins walking around and looking in my general direction. I was absolutely terrified and took off running. As I'm running, I could hear whatever this was running alongside me, still 75 yards or so away, until it hits a massive drop-off, which is an area called 3 Caves. I'm on the trail, going down towards my vehicle, and I hear the craziest, almost human-like scream growl that I've ever heard, echoing from the top of the drop-off where the caves is located at. I immediately get in my vehicle and take off. I have no clue what this was. I'm not the type to BS a story or see things that aren't there or any of this, so it's all weird to me. I have begun re-hiking and watching these areas as well as looking for signs of the monster, and will update you as my progress is made. I should clarify when I say hunting, I don't mean I plan to kill whatever this is, but I would like to get a picture of it or more evidence. Alright, just to preface, I'm on mobile, so I'm sorry for formatting, but I live in southern Indiana, right on the border to Kentucky. I live in a small town, right smack in the middle, but we still have lots of wooded areas, parks, etc. My roommate works at McDonald's, and he sent me a message, clearly shook. He's telling me he saw a skinwalker. I'm not into that at all, so he explains what that is. He tells me he saw the big white mass, probably the size of a dog, so I assume coyotes, of course, go around some plants outside. He goes to check, and to his surprise, a black dog. Not a single light spot on its body. He said the dog didn't even acknowledge him as it walked away. Well, fast forward a few days to today. I'm coming home from work, about midnight, and I see this big white blur across the road outside my apartment. My thought is, oh hey, a dog. So I park and I go across the road to the bushes that I saw it run into, and I find a black cat that looks off as soon as I come over. No sign of it being a big white dog. I have been hesitant to write about these incidents. I do not want to be labeled a loon. I do not know what is coming in my house, but I do know that it is not human. To begin, I live in a small town. Not much happens with the exception of meth heads murdering each other. I have been visited by something with such frequency that I noticed a pattern. It always occurs during the week of the full moon. I cannot see it, but I smell a strong odor of dried, decaying flowers and a sickly sweet earthly decay smell. Sometimes it is so strong around me that I get nauseous. Very overwhelming. That being said, I don't know what it is. I am not afraid of it. I get the feeling it is watching me, but I am not afraid. But whatever it is, my cats stare in the direction of it, which is very off-putting. I'm not crazy. I also check outside in daylight hours. I'm no idiot. To see if there is any dead animals, but there's none. This has been happening for at least 2 years, and I am just curious to y'all's thoughts. I do live over underground in tunnels in my town, running to all the old civil defense buildings used as bomb shelters. Anything could be there. Last thing, Weird and wonderful things happen to me all the time. What's your take? I work on oil rigs. I have since I was 20, and I'm 33 now. In 2007, I was working for Nomad Drilling, and they have since sold out to Patterson, and we were drilling in the Haynesville for natural gas. Anyone who works on rigs knows that work can take you way off the beaten path from what normal civilization is used to. Some places, you're on ranch roads for an hour before you reach the location, and others you're driving on roads canopied by trees in the backwoods of Louisiana. This happened to me in the latter. We were rigging right down after fishing a well, and we were on our last night of the 7-day hitch. About halfway through our 12-hour tour, pronounced tower, and we had pretty much finished and making sure everything was tied down securely for the rig move. We killed the light plants, and the driller let us knock off early. This area was accessible outside Houghton, and the lease was actually on the back of the Barksdale Air Force Base, but we had to leave the way we came in. Driving home at 2 in the morning seemed pretty normal at first, and I made it to the blacktop with no issues. The blacktop was still canopied by trees, and other than the lights from my truck, everything was pitch black. Out of nowhere, still basically in the middle of nowhere, this thing appears almost close enough to get hit on my driver's side. Okay, weird, but even more strange. He was leaning at what I swear was an impossible angle for somebody not to tip over. They were stretched, reaching out towards my truck, and what I could see, the face was morbid and twisted. The hairs on the back of my neck raised, and I gassed it to speed back closer to society. It was about a 2-hour drive home, and I felt off the rest of the trip. More oddly, I was working over on a separate occasion with one of the crews that work when I'm home, and another hand was talking about a very similar, if not identical, experience. I don't know who or what I saw, and the face could have been a blur from a relative distance, speed, and the time I actually saw it, whatever it was. But what could it have possibly been? I come from a family of hunters. It was not uncommon for my mom and stepdad to go out early morning and not come home until well into the night on occasion. In rural Georgia, it is fairly common for landowners to lease out their acres for hunting to different folks depending on the seasonality and the type of hunting they are doing. And deer season for archers begins at the end of summer. My mother has this story that I loved to hear as a child that, as an adult, had a horrifying twist. One afternoon, my parents struck out to hunt for the day. The land they leased that particular year ran alongside a power line route. These routes are clear-cut through woods and create a man-made field. A hunter can set their tree stands up in the thickets of surrounding these fields and waiting for grazing animals to come by. Around dusk, my mom started to look out for my stepdad to come and pick her up. He would usually help her get situated in her stand, then go and find his and set up further down the trail. As the sun began to sink, she saw him walking down the power line clearing. My stepdad is a brolic type man that has a wide gait in his walk. He swings his arm a bit as he walks. I mean, it's kind of similar to a caveman to me. Even in the low sinking light, she could make out his silhouette and could see that he was zigzagging from side to side of the clear-cut field. He'd obviously forgotten where they had set her stand up and was trying to find her. So, she stood up, waved her hands to get his attention. At that moment, the creature she thought was my stepdad noticed her. It dropped down to all fours and darted into the woods, making a strange low growl as it did. She waited for what seemed like an eternity for my stepdad to come and get her. She was terrified and in tears. This story was shared many times in my childhood, and when I asked for a scary hunting story, they had plenty of them. It's not that I didn't believe my mom, but we all know that the night can play tricks on us and heighten our imagination. So, when I asked for this story in my teenage years, imagine my surprise when my stepdad spoke up. A man of few words and a lack of imagination, he raised his head at the dinner table. I've never told either of you this, but I think I probably should. That night, the creature wasn't running away from your mother. I was walking along the line of the woods toward her tree stand when I noticed it. I smelt it before I actually saw the thing. It had a pungent odor, almost skunk-like, and it seemed to be a little over 6 foot tall, covered in thick, coarse hair. It saw me about the same time as I drew back an arrow to take aim. At first it growled, and then dropped to all fours and sprinted towards me as I released the arrow, knocking it in the arm. I was shaking and just missed the intended hit. The animal veered to the side and kept running. To this day, I wonder what that creature was. This is an encounter I had several years ago deer hunting during gun season in rural West Virginia. I was hunting on my aunt and uncle's land. I was situated in a tree stand on top of a ridgeline and could see down into either side. Visibility was limited, though, due to brush and trees. It was a little after daybreak, and all the shooting had started. All of a sudden, I hear this massive crashing through the underbrush in front of me, headed down in between the two ridgelines. Whatever this was walking on 2 legs clearly from the sound of it, and it was big. I couldn't see much other than a large dark shape running through the brush. I've heard hunters before trying to flush deer that had bedded down, and this wasn't that. It was something running to get away from something. The neighbors on that side were too old to hunt and do this. To my knowledge, nobody was in the woods that direction of my stand. I didn't get a clear look at whatever it was, but I know it was walking on 2 legs, and either dark brown or black in color. Haven't seen it since then, and I'm not sure if it's even still there now. I just know it was unnerving at the time. My dad even mentioned it to me when we met for lunch and asked if it was me or if I saw who it was. I told him what I saw and heard, and he just said, "Huh, well that's weird." I don't know if it was a Bigfoot or some other humanoid. Also, for reference, this was close to the Mothman sightings, but it wasn't the Mothman that much I know. I've been interested in crawlers for a long time, even if I didn't necessarily know what to call them. I read a post a long time ago about how humans have a deep fear for creatures that resemble them, and theorized we had an ancestral memory of long extinct predator. I've toyed with the idea on and off for a long time since then. I've been seeing something walking around my office in the bushes. At first it was transient, but now I'm not so sure. I got a pretty good look at it out the window the other day, and it looked all wrong for a human. I'm afraid about some of the people who work here late at night. Does anyone know any real information about these? And no, I'm not talking about the fictional creepypasta or the rake. I'm talking about a real creature. I thought I would post about an encounter with a strange creature that I had. I'm a pretty big skeptic when it comes to stuff like this, and sometimes I doubt whether I actually saw it or not, but I remember it very clearly. In my hometown, there's a forest that's pretty big. Trails around the edges where people walk their dogs, but no one really goes inwards to the depths of it. Once a month or so, I get there bird watching. There's also a small river which, in drier months, is basically just a dip filled with mud and leaves. I walk along it on my way in, again on my way out. About 2 years ago, I was walking along the riverbank in May or June when, ahead of me, I saw what looked like a pale, hairless nude person digging around in the mud. I got a bit closer and realized the thing didn't appear to be human. It was quite tall, its skin being a light medium gray, and it had no facial features that I could discern from at a distance, but with what looked to be a large, sunken, deep eyes. It was squatting and using its hands to rifle through the mud. Its arms were very long compared to a human, and it was very thin. I watched it for about 30 seconds or so when it looked in my direction, and I think it saw me. because it paused and seemed to be staring at me for a few seconds. It then turned around, disappearing quickly but casually into the trees on all fours. I hadn't seen it before or since. I left just after because I was apprehensive and worried it might be something aggressive, but there wasn't anything in its demeanor that made me feel threatened. It was like watching an animal foraging and seemed calm the whole time. A lot of encounters I've read seem to be about creatures that have a menacing energy, but this thing just seemed to want to go about its business uninterrupted. If anyone has any idea what I might have seen, I'd appreciate it if you could let me know.